Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's questions and challenges, where the topic of discussion this evening is Rizq. And I'm your host, Ameer Din, and I'm joined tonight by Shaykh Ruzwan Muhammad this evening. Welcome to all of you who are joining us today. We're live on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And just before we get started, I'd like to plug a small reminder about the upcoming course, the day course called The Fiqh of Life, held in Glasgow on the 15th of September. There's more details just below in the banner. This is going to be delivered by Shaykh Ruzwan himself, and it's a course not to be missed and has been described as your 101 guide to halal and haram in daily life. So please take the opportunity to sign up to that course, that day course in Glasgow. I'll be there, inshallah, so it'll be nice to meet you all there, inshallah. So the topic of discussion, as I said, is Rizq, and the question may be why have we decided to talk about this? And the reality of it is that one of the main issues that we're seeing in the community, and particularly in the work that I'm doing with young people, is the ongoing desire and hunger for material wealth, specifically money. And I think the purpose of this session would be to understand from an Islamic perspective, how do we understand what our risk is and how do we balance that? Because the reality of it is, in this day and age, in this generation, particularly in the West, so many things are dependent and so many things are, I don't know, for our younger generations, they particularly sort of strive to be the person with the most bling, with the best trainers, etc., so on and so forth. So I think it's important that we have this discussion. Shaykh Ruzwan's going to walk us through that. And one of the key elements here, and something I think is a reality that we need to understand, is that there are young people in our community, from the Muslim community, who are unfortunately earning in a haram way. And one of the difficulties is convincing them or giving them that confidence that coming away from that haram income is the best thing for them. Because the reality is, if they're earning £2,000 a week, £3,000 a week, whatever it might be, doing something of a haram nature, how can we tell them that going to an £11 an hour job is the right thing for them? So, Sheikh, that's the kind of backstory and the kind of why we're here today. And I'd like to kind of bring you in and understand. We're talking about risk here, and we're talking about material wealth and how it's corrupting the minds of our young people.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammad, khatim al-anbiya wa sayyid al-mursaleen, assalamu alaikum. And yeah, this is a big topic, because if you think about it, if you follow your social media feed, you'll be fed. So it's just from the word itself, fed. You're fed, and what you're fed is what your nafs, essentially your ego, requires, and what the feed actually feeds you is things that you start to eat and consume and to latch onto. And I think a lot of people underestimate, and they shouldn't, and in fact, I don't think they can consistently do that anymore, is to underestimate the power of how social media is actually shining a light and almost like a mirror onto our own state as individuals. Because, to be honest, you're using your mobile phone and you're using it in a private capacity. You're not sitting with your family, your friends. Even though kids do that, you go to a school, you sit outside, they're sitting outside the wall at school, you'll see 5 or 6 kids there, 14, 15, 16, they're all sitting individually with their phones consuming stuff. Now, what they're given, interesting enough, is what their nafs wants, which is a type of rizq. It's a type of sustenance. It's sustenance for something that they feel a void. And so one of the things about human beings is when they come into existence, I want to take it way back and then come to 50 cents and your gangsters in the street and all that, because it all makes sense once you look at the fact that the person in the street running after the 2,000 a week is essentially no different from the sons of Adam, alayhi salatu wasalam. That you have to really understand the fact that you take away the urban setting, you take away the fact that there's commodities and there's marketing and there's cars and all the rest of it that you can acquire. Essentially, at the core of it is something very interesting, which is a desire for something that other people have. And almost like also tied into that is this idea of vanity. Also within this is this idea of arrogance and ujub, which is kind of this desire for yourself to be seen to be something greater than what you are. It's a consumption of something. And rizq essentially is one of the things that you consume. Essentially, that's what drives you to move. And as a fetus, you come into the world and you kind of you go through your early stages and you're wanting to consume. You're asking. The child feels no etiquette in asking for food. It just starts crying. It might be antisocial. It might be annoying. You might see people looking at you with your child saying, keep your child quiet, but it won't. It wants food. Once it gets older, it starts to understand that not everything that you want you can have, and also not everything you want is good for you. And so there's time for eating, and you start to have set times for eating and drinking. And then as you get older, if you're trained and your etiquette is put into you by your parents and your society, you realize that when you're striving to get something, you should do it in a way that takes into account other people's feelings, but also the effect of that to other people, like stealing. Like
Mm.
a child won't think, when it's an infant, it won't think about taking. But once it realizes it's somebody else's, and if I had that, would I want somebody to take it from me? The golden rule in all religions, I wouldn't. So why should I take somebody else's? Now that starts to become the rule until you're told that no, you have the power and the capacity just to consume and take whatever it is because it's your right, and you almost go back to that infantile state, the nafs, and it's all risk. And the interesting, if you go very deep in our books of aqidah, even if you steal, it's still rizq. If you go out into the street in the middle of Newcastle or Glasgow and you snatch somebody's phone and you run with it and you sell it and then you eat it, it's still your rizq. But what that does when it gets into you is different from the one that you make something, or you earn a livelihood through something that's halal, or you strive to do it in the best way and you consume it, or you give it to your child, to your parents or your family to consume. The effect's different. And
Mm.
so that's what I think people, because what we're fed in social media is, okay, this is a way you can get from £100 to 10,000, or this is how you can go from 10 followers to 10,000 followers, and this is the kind of investment stream that you need to do to cut yourself off from the way people live. And then within that partly is the kind of masculinity as well, because unfortunately it is partly a kind of exaggerated form of masculinity, where it's seen that you're not successful as a man unless you can just consume lots of wealth, accrue lots of wealth, and then spend it and throw it out with all the bling. And essentially,
Mm.
that's the marker of what success is now. And
Yeah.
so, what's interesting is your risk is going to come to you, and this is what's the interesting thing: the risk that you're that's written for you follows you, even like your shroud, your shroud of death will follow you. It's almost like following you wherever you go. It's not going to disappear. It's a question of how you get it.
Yeah.
So it's you can do multifaceted discussion about the risk. Has to start with the fact that we can, as human beings, we consume, we have to take in, we're in need. And risk is actually a word that's used for what you actually intake, which is quite an interesting idea, because it's different from, we'll come to this later, it's different from your bank balance, it's different from your assets, it's different from Elon Musk's, what is he now, how many billion, he's up there somewhere. All those people that have a net value, that is not risk. And that's, and also, if you're employed by somebody, your what you're getting in at the end of the month is not your risk as well. That's called ma'ash. And what your net worth is called your mal. In Arabic, it's fascinating. All these words mean different
Mm.
things. And I think the reason why people really lose track of what they should be trying to attain in life is that they mix up rizq and ideas of wealth and ideas of salary,
Mm.
and it's all a blur because you need to get the next car, you need to upgrade, you need to, everything is consumption. And within that idea of what we learned as we were growing up as children, of the fact other people have rights, if you're stealing from somebody, doing fraudulent actions, then it's taking away somebody else's, somewhere there's no victimless crime in a sense, especially in terms of this we'll talk about later. That's
Yeah.
really, really important to understand. The depth is very, very important.
That's a lot of information there, Sheikh. I think one of the key things you've touched upon there is the reality of social media has amplified this, as you called it, the feed, and it's feeding into people's egos, into their nafs and their desires of what they're looking for. And I also will say as well, I know we talked about masculinity and trying to be the big papa of the street in terms of your earnings and what you're making, but I believe there'll be similar traits through females as well. I think the reality of it is gender, male or female nowadays, it doesn't. There'll be scenarios of both where they are money hungry, and it's, you're right to have defined there that when we talk about risk, which I'll ask you in a few moments to define, is it's not just there's different understandings of it, and people might kind of blur and mix those lines up. I think when we're looking at the kind of today's kind of generation, and as I said, today's youth particularly, social media, absolutely. When we look at what people are wearing, we look at the cars, as you said, the car, you mentioned cars at one point there. Nowadays, with the ability to PCP, with the ability to PCH, different contracts and etc., people can pick up very expensive things at a very affordable price because they can take them on payments. Nowadays, you can't get past the checkout. I mean, for example, when I signed up to the Fiqh of Life course, interestingly, it did say at the bottom, do I want to spread these payments? So you can't get very far. And obviously this was I'm talking about in the bigger scales of things. When you're buying out with your means, it's much easier to do that when you have the ability to spread payments. But what you're doing there is, as I said there, I believe, and it might be wrong, but I believe that you're purchasing out with your means. You're putting yourself under financial pressure, and you have to ask yourself the question as to why. What are you trying to achieve by doing that? It might be that you seek a reliable car, and so you have to spend a wee bit more, but it might be the complete opposite of that. I've got a lot of young people that will float about the streets of Glasgow in high ticket vehicles, and the purpose is not just to be able to drive a car that's reliable. They're not bothered about the warranty. They're not bothered about the fact that the oil filter's not going to need change. No, they're bothered about the fact that it's got a nice shiny badge and that he's going to look like a hero. And that's kind of where this kind of conversation from my perspective. But I'd like to understand, Sheikh, and I'm going to assume that we have some listeners who may not understand the term risk. Can we take it back to what does that word actually mean from an Islamic perspective?
Yeah, so risk is a very simple concept. It is basically something that is written for you the moment that you're conceived. The moment you're conceived and your soul is blown into you, an angel comes and it writes one of four things, one of which is rizq. Essentially, that means by the time you finish your life and people wrap you up in the white cloth and put you into a grave, by that time you will have consumed certain things, and that's your rizq. So that can be food, it can be wealth, it can be even relationships, it can be friendships. That's the things that are put in front of you by God to make you who you are. But usually it's used for wealth. So it's the things that you will consume throughout your life, and you will die having completed it. In other words, that cake that was written for you, whatever size, if it's massive or it's the size of the one Elon Musk has, or Abdurrahman ibn Auf, the famous companion, had a massive one. I mean, you could take it into the billions in terms of pounds now. That is, you're going to consume that. In other words, you're going to use it. In other words, you might consume it or you might give it out. But the point is that you've had utility of it, and you've given it, you've actually made use of it through your own choice. Now, what's important is the Prophet ﷺ said that there'll come a time upon people when they won't care where the risk comes from. In other words, it's not that they don't care about the cake's the same. When you imagine the cake, and when you're going to get it, the action to get the piece of cake that you're about to consume can be an action which is a good or bad action. In other words, the risk is going to be the same. It's not going to increase or decrease. What you're going to end up having by the time you die is going to be the same. But what's going to change is the way that you act to get it. You could kill somebody, you could disinherit somebody, you could sell narcotics on the street, and you could cause the deaths of thousands of people, or you could invest and you could create employment, and people would make dua for you, and you could create industries and commerce, and that would be again something that you'd be given as a reward, even in your grave. So it's a question of your choice, because it's going to happen. And in fact, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is very interesting, is that, he said, the Prophet ﷺ said that the angel Jibreel came to him and inspired him with the information that no soul dies except that it has consumed all of its rizq. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَجْمِلُوا فِي الطَّلَبِ. Therefore, when you're trying to seek it, the action has to be a good action. The way that you try and seek it out has to be a good action. And the Prophet then said in a narration of Imam Tabarani, if you find it difficult, in other words, this is what everyone will think about, well, I'm trying and then it's just becoming really, really difficult. The Prophet said, and if you find it difficult, then do not try to hasten it. In other words, try and run after it by disobeying God. In other words, you don't know where your risk is. What you're trying to do, getting a bit apprehensive. You're jumping the gun a bit, and you're saying, okay, was it opportunity? He's offered me this to move this from here to there. That's my risk. I'll just take it. No, that thing that you're going to consume and benefit from is going to come to you. It's a question of choice, isn't it? Now you're with these, it's almost like a fork. You're at this junction and you're choosing. And that junction now could be the one here where it's, let's take a clear haram, like you're selling something that's going to cause harm to people. But just down the road, you cannot see it. There's another junction saying that this is something that will gain blessing in your life. And that's the whole thing. Because, the course I'm doing on the 15th is, part of it's to do with just halal and haram, like choices. People always have to make a choice. It's not as if you're forced to eat haram or forced to consume haram. The reality is that you have choices. A question of when you have it. You might be hungry and you're in, let's say you're in a service station and the only place there is McDonald's. But you're kind of hungry, you're peckish. Well, 20 miles down the road, there's somewhere else you can eat. But I would rather have this, which is dubious for a number of reasons. Divestment, supporting Israel, the source of the meat, and cross-contamination. We'll talk about that in the course. But essentially, it's a choice, because you could drive down. You're going another 20 miles anyway. You're slightly peckish. You're not going to die. You're not going to faint. Okay, but the nafs is saying, "I want it now." But then the reality of building yourself up as a character is to say, "Well, I can wait." And that's essentially what it is. It becomes a situation where, first of all, I think you need to know what's halal and haram, because sometimes people sometimes jump to think something's haram when it's not. And so this is the big problem I find, is that, when people hear something like what I'm saying now, they say, in their mind, they've got, this is haram, this is haram, this is haram. Oh my goodness, I used to sit in my room and just make dhikr. And that's the opposite. Because first of all, you haven't understood what haram is in the first place. We're just saying rizq is what you consume and benefit from, which is different from mal. Mal is basically your kind of wealth that you have in your bank. Like, you could have a bank account and you'd have, let's say, £10,000 there. You die tomorrow, that was not your rizq. It's going to your children or your family, or to the income tax. It's going somewhere else. Yeah. But you did own it, didn't you? You had the 10,000. And you are earning 2,000 every week. Yes. And you've got all this stuff under your mattress, and you've got Bitcoin stashed away and all the rest. If you die in a car crash next week, was that your risk? No, it wasn't. But you're going to be judged on the actions you took to try and preempt it. It's almost like you cannot fool God on this, because essentially what people try and do in a sense is to fool God by earning and consuming when they know that only the future is only known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why it's an interesting thing that you have to strive to gain rizq. Rizq is something
Mm,
that is going to nourish you, is going to build you up, but it's a question of choices in life. And Islam is an amazing religion because of the fact it gives you responsibility. You want to be the big G, then you've got responsibility. Big, broad shoulders, you got responsibility. You want to be a mother or a wife who wants to raise up the next generation of big G's. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it through a process of teaching people basic ways of earning halal. What are the
mm,
ways? And there's nothing wrong with it. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was multi-billionaire in terms of today's wealth. The richest man in the history of humanity was actually a Muslim African prince from sub-Saharan Western Africa. I mean, up until now. So, well, what was he doing haram? Nothing. He earned. He did trade, commerce. He traveled on this amazing trip to Hajj, dishing out gold coins. I
gold,
mean,
yeah.
think of a Don throwing out coins in Egypt. So much so in Egypt, actually, it led to a inflationary crash of the economy. He just kind of, it was so much gold, and so look, it's not about wealth, and it's not about having the bling car. There's nothing wrong with it. The Prophet said, which of you does not like to have the best of clothes? When one of the companions, you said that, I'm wearing clothes that are expensive and they're beautiful. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Inna Allah jamil yuhibbul jamal. God is beautiful, loves that which exudes beauty. And there's nothing wrong with, also the Prophet ﷺ said, God, you should show the blessings of God upon you. So if you're given
Mm,
wealth, there should be a way of seeing that, because not just to show off, but to show people that this is a blessing that God gave me. Look at how I did it. Look at how I earned the money. And if you know the person's a good person, you're saying, well, how did he? So if he can do it, I can do it. So it's an interesting thing where it's not about pushing poverty. It's not about telling people, like, I don't have a car, but it's not telling people, look, I'm more pious because I don't have a car, or I'm more pious because I don't have, say, let's say, quote unquote, a conventional mortgage, for example, or I'm more pious because I've never gone to a restaurant to eat or something. This is not a sign of piety. And I think the issue here is it's not black and white. And the problem with this whole idea of halal and haram, everyone just says, okay, I know it's haram, but I'll just do it. Whereas they don't check very specifically whether something's halal or haram, whether your rizq is written in a specific place or not. You need to put the hours in. You need to put the time in to check, what am I doing for my life? How am I earning my living? Is it halal, and is it something that's going to be a blessing for me?
That's again lots of valuable information there, Sheikh. One of the things that you touched upon there was the choices. So you've very that was a really good analogy with the cake and being able to, you're going to get the same slice of cake, but how you achieve getting that slice is the choice. And I guess that's one of the kind of questions as well, is how do you view the balance between effort and then what's written for you already? Because that's one of the key kind of things. Well, if it's you hear it time and time again, well, if it's written for me, it's going to happen, and it's
Mm,
almost that kind of blasé approach where I don't need to do anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me what's for me, and
okay.
if it's for me, it won't pass me. Qismat, all these other terminologies, people always kind of have that, yeah, well, it wasn't meant to be for me. How do you balance that? Like how should people view that balance between human responsibility and
I mean,
the will of
it's
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
it's an interesting, yeah, because that's the basic way, isn't it? Because people fall back lazily on these kind of cliches of qismat and destiny, qada and qadar. Well, it's written, it's going to happen. Well, Sheikh told me that the angel blew and told me what I'm getting, and what my death, what I'll like, well, how many calories I'll have consumed, and so on and so forth. That's not what's being said. Nobody knows what's written for you, and by the time you die, it doesn't make any. You can't go back and trace back and check where your risk was. It doesn't make any sense. Like at this moment in time, you have no idea what you're going to be next year. Like you don't know your income, you don't know the degree of prosperity or poverty you'll go into. But
Mm.
what you're told is that you have to acquire it. You have to struggle. And actually, a fantastic story. One of um, the best stories of this is the story of Maryam in the Quran. This is actually mind blowing, mind blowing. Because when she's worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem, and the Prophet Zechariah comes to her to give her food and to see how she is. And he comes and he finds fruit, he finds sustenance, he finds things that she has rizq, but it's out of season. Like, and out of season that day and age is a miracle, because it's not as if, okay, it's come from New Zealand or imported from such and such. You cannot get fruit out of season, and she has it. And also she has it, and we don't know where it came from. So it's like miraculous. That's your nasib, qismat, qadar is going to come from the skies and all the rest of it. She gets it when she doesn't need it. She's being provided for. She is set aside for nothing except for the worship of God. And what we find then is that when she is in need in her life, when she's heavily pregnant, when she has been thrown out of Jerusalem, when she is struggling for anybody to help her, she's under a date palm tree, and Allah says, "Huzzi ilayki bi jaz'i nakhlati." You want food, you're going to have to shake the date tree. You're going to have to shake. You've seen the size of a date tree, and you know how much you have to. You have no idea, Amir. I guarantee how much you have to shake a date tree, even if it's right, to get the dates to fall down. Huzzi ilayki. You have to really shake this tree. And so why didn't God send her down the rizq? Why didn't God send her a plate of that and water ready for her at the exact place she was? Because there's this idea that you have to strive and struggle and you have to acquire. And nothing comes except with striving. And there's nothing for human beings except what they strive for. And so you cannot, and this comes back to hadith. The Prophet ﷺ is very lovely hadith. The Prophet ﷺ used to go into the house of Fatima radiallahu anh when she just got married with Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh. And in one of the narrations, it says that Fatima said that he lightly pushed her with his foot. And he says, Qumi washhadi rizqa rabbiki. He says, wake up. And this is early morning. This is just after he prayed Fajr. And he says, wake and witness the rizq of your Lord. Sustenance, rizq, that word comes up. And do not be amongst the people that are heedless, because God, what do you call it? You kind of gives out the rizq of people between the start of Fajr to the rising of the sun, in that early morning. In other words, get up. If you read these kind of social media guys, and Jordan Peterson's fantastic not fantastic anymore, but anyway, he's famous for this, for his 12 rules of life. And I think one of them was something stupid like, make your bed in the morning or something. When you get up, make your bed. Wow, mashallah, 12 rules, 12 hadith of this amazing wise man. What? Make your bed in the morning. This is the kind of thing that passes for wisdom. But the reality is, you in the morning do something productive. And that is what the Prophet said. You have to strive. And the fact that he said that to her indicates that you have to get up and go. You have to have that drive to get up and get your rizq. Because, to be honest, you have so much potential as a human being. And life is a test. And it is a test that is one where we're all vying for good actions and our rizq and everything. Like, we're doing multiple races at the same time, Amir. Like one race is to raise your children. One race is to be a good friend. One is to be a good father or mother. One is to have an income and sustenance which is, ethical and pure and something you can be proud of. One is to build up your character. We've got multiple streams of activity we're doing, and everybody's going to be different. Some people are going to be amazing in creating the wealth. in the best way, and some people are going to be
Yeah.
amazing in creating wealth that is made in the most destructive way. People will be amazing in creating this amazing akhlaq, this character that people, when they die, they think we've missed and we've lost somebody amazing. And some people will die with a character which is so repugnant that people will say, well, it's good that we've thrown them into the ground. That's reality. And so we're always we're left with a choice. When you get older and you look back at your choices, and I've known a lot of people who've come back to God after having, gone in the completely opposite direction. And it's fascinating when you speak to them how deep their story is when they cut off, something that they knew was wrong, which is different from a person who's had a lovely life all their life and they had a good education and they've got a nice job and they've got married and they've nice, acceptable kind of employment, and they've not been in the ditch and they've not had to struggle with their fingernails for their own survival. They've not done that, but when they do, like Malcolm X, you realize the depth of their understanding of what rizq is and what halal is and what the blessing of, rizq is, good rizq is, and the effect of bad rizq is on society, because you're peddling drugs and all these kind of things, or these kind of multi-billionaire financiers who bet on currency that creates poverty within nations, like George Soros, like brought multiple currencies down, leading to inflation and poverty in lots of countries. That person's as bad as the worst of, in fact, worse than the worst of drug dealers. Everybody's on this race. Everybody's
Yeah.
on this amazing race, and everybody is one day going to stand in front of Allah, and Allah's going to have them audit their own life. And that transaction you did at that point, this is what it caused. And this charity you gave at this point, this is what it caused. Like both ways, like the good and the
Yeah.
good, as you said, the good, bad, and ugly.
So don't fear HMRC, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, is what you're saying, Sheikh.
Well,
So I'm going to save one of the questions that I was going to have for your Fiqh of Life course, which was to do with if you have wealth that has been accumulated in a halal manner, and you spend that, i.e., on a material thing, is there any? Will you be questioned about that purchase, in the sense of you could have done something better with it, or is it yours to do your own? But again, I don't want to. We can save that one for the Fiqh of Life day course that's happening
the thing
soon.
about the thing about the Fiqh of Life course is all the kind of deep scenarios, and because today, actually, I was reviewing all the fatwas in cryptocurrency, and I was actually surprised. This is from 2021. I checked quite prominent scholars in the Muslim world and their views on cryptocurrency. I was actually really surprised, because I thought, what I thought and what I kind of reviewed and researched and gone through, it's not what people think. And in fact, I did a video yesterday on the Fiqh of Life, and I was in a cafe, and I had a pastry, and it has the kind of what does it have, the allergy stuff, and I said, and it included nutmeg, and I remembered, oh my goodness, I read this fatwa about the fact that nutmeg is haram, and
Oh,
yeah. So it's like, because it's an intoxicant according to a lot of scholars actually, and I was thinking,
wow.
yeah. So the thing is, when we think about halal and the questions, it's really fascinating that we don't look at the principles of why things are haram and what's halal. When we talk about what's halal and haram in terms of income, a lot of people are struggling in employment in this day and age, regardless of where you are on earth, unless you're in some mountain ravine in Afghanistan or Somalia. You are touched by the dust of usury and interest. There's no doubt about it. And the Prophet did say that there will come time upon people a time when, even if they don't consume usury and interest, they will not be immune from its dust.
Hmm.
And I said this is a rabbi in the House of Lords about 3-4 years ago, because I was giving a talk, and I said, you know where this comes from? It's also part of your Torah. It's also part of their religious tradition, oral tradition of the Jews. And he had no idea. And I showed him the reference for it, and he said, really? Amazing. And it was like, But the reality is, it's almost impossible to free yourself from any, risk which is totally halal. So the question is what I'm going to do in the course is look at gradation and the degree to
Mm.
which definitely should not do certain things, and the degree to which you have choice, and to make it manageable, and also to make it something that is, plausible for you to gain what we call now halal risk. Is very, really, really
Mm.
important.
So, Sheikh, let's look at another scenario of. So, we've spoken about the halal and haram income and people having trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as to what's written for them, and still strive towards that, work towards that. We don't take our foot off the gas and expect the car to still move. Let's play the scenario of somebody who is working in a halal way and they are struggling, month to month, and they're, finding themselves in a really tricky situation. And where should they dig? I mean, we know that we have to have trust that, as you very rightly mentioned at one point as well, that everything in this dunya is a test for us. So that particular individual is going to be tested. And one of the things that I've recognised is that it's interesting when you come across people, and I know we tend to bring this conversation back to wealth. So apologies to anyone who's who's finding that we keep coming back to the monetary element, but one of the things I found interesting was that when you observe people who appear wealthy from a monetary perspective on the outside, it's very easy to be falsely led to believe that their life is hunky dory or their life is not without tribulation. That's one of the key things that I've understood, that where they may be, as you said, they can be blessed in their stream or their race of wealth, but actually in other streams they are struggling. And so the truth is, though, we are in a kind of generation, we're in a place where money is a really high priority in people's minds right
Mm,
now. We're going through an economic sort of disaster right now. They're talking about energy prices are going to be going back up again in
mm.
October. Um, Everybody's struggling. So, in terms of that scenario of somebody who's earning, who's out there working, could be a single parent, could be someone who's working part time, looking after children. They're struggling every month. How should they, from an Islamic perspective, keep themselves going? What's the kind of things that they should be holding on to?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is, the studies done on this, on contentment and happiness, and from different types of people, from people that were low income, high income, and they've gained a certain amount of wealth. There's a certain amount of wealth which is actually just a medium income, after which there's no increase in happiness, well-being, all the markers of happiness and contentment. It plateaus out. In fact, what happens is it becomes worse in terms of stress. So there's this thing that, why are we, you have to ask yourself, why are you looking to increase when at a certain point it will plateau, because we know that that plateau happens. So it's more about looking at how we view wealth, how we view income, how we view social status, because a lot of this is actually to do with looking at people. In fact, there's a question, somebody put up, which is seeing somebody else and they're happy, and it's either on their third holiday of the year or something, and you're sitting in Glasgow and it's raining, and then you're soaked, and it's like really misery. And then you're thinking, oh, I need to be like that person. It's like the sons of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, where إِذْ تُقُبِّلَ مِنْ أَحَدِهِمَا وَلَمْ يُتَقَبَّلْ مِنَ الْآخَرِ. Sacrifice something for the sake of God. It was accepted by one, not by the other. He's looking, well, why was mine's not accepted? And he just kills his brother. So multiply that and bring it into today's world in terms of just appearances, and that's the same thing. It's this kind of envy that strikes human beings, which is at the very core of our being, at very
Mm.
molecular DNA level, where we want to be like the Joneses or the Ahmeds, or I don't know who the Ahmeds are actually, but you know what I mean. There's a sense that, well, they look happy, and then you think of the Prophet ﷺ, who addressed this, "Inna al-ghina ghina nafs." Like, while he said, as for wealth, it's wealth of soul. like and you don't really. I mean, I think people when if they travel and they met people and they just sat with people, they would realize what that meant of the Prophet ﷺ, that real richness and wealth is the wealth of the soul. Like if you meet people who are content with just, I know people that they come to a certain place, they have, probably 4 or 5 kilos of vegetables on a rack, and they sell it. And when by the time they've sold it, they're happy, and you speak to them and they're content, and then they go home, and they go home happy, and they go. You're thinking, well, that's not enough if you were unable to work next week to sustain yourself or something. But where's that contentment come from? It is actually
Mm.
quite irritating for a person who's very materialistic or is unable to cut away from, the fact you need a buffer to survive, and you need to plan out the next holiday, and you need to plan out X, Y, and Z. It's really interesting because then our whole idea of wealth and happiness, because essentially it's about wealth and happiness. You're not going to die of hunger. So then it's a question of what you're competing with, and that's real kind of
Yeah.
the kind of very touchy issue that we have to think about ourselves.
Let's look at the question that we've got there. So, do you think social media is affecting people to take action on their risk? And if it is, what is a way to resolve this issue as people can't switch off?
Okay. Okay. Do you think social media is effective, affecting people to take action on their risk? I think it.
Is it
I think
teasing people?
But if you look at your feed, I mean, I don't have feeds, but I'm imagining it's saying, "Do you want to do this?" Or you're looking at somebody with a hyper income income stream, and it's kind of okay. It's passive. The one now is passive income, so you've got multiple streams. And I've seen this even in Turkey. They say, "Okay, it's time to leave your job and have multiple income streams." And side hustle is another way that you describe it. So it's hustling. Hustling is essentially, if you think what's a hustle, it's like you're kind of working based on your initiative, and also you're hustling out other people. So you're kind of carving out something for yourself. So it's this sense of not just being an entrepreneur, but it's carving out income for yourself, and there's nothing wrong with it. But it's this sense that it then leads to this lavish lifestyle, or you need to then have downtime and relax, and passive income's all to do with the fact that you'll be chilling essentially, because why are you going to be passively taking an income if you're going to be working and
Yeah.
stressing and all the rest of it? The idea is you don't stress, you don't have to answer to your work colleagues or interact with them, you don't have to have a boss at work. It's just chill mode. And so that is, again, you went to the first thing I said right at the beginning, is this feed. Social media, it feeds you what your nafs wants, and the nafs wants more and more, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And so the way you switch off is essentially you have to filter out all that. It's very difficult because it's addictive. Everything they have, it's like anything that you are fed in the past that you had gained directly, now you gain it from a screen. Like you have pornography, you have hypersexuality, you have projections of immense wealth and seeking after that. You've got all these things that you're told that you might want or change. Like, look at yourself, so much you can achieve, you need to change, and your life as it is now is beyond you. It's not even befitting of you to live the life you're living, and you become really depressed because the life you're living now is not really the life that you want to live. It becomes very difficult. And where is this coming from? This constant feed that you're having. And one of those streams is this income stream, of how to raise the income and how to provide, and obviously in a very clear situation of cost of living. They have words for this: cost of living crisis. The reality is, it was daylight robbery, because if you think of where it came from, bailing out the banks, who didn't need it, for what reason? For a very specific reason. Well, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they reframe it. Quantitative easing. That's a famous. I don't know if you know about this quantitative easing. That word is increasing credit in the economy. Basically, you're printing money.
Mm.
Why you say you're just a bunch of mafia printing money out and thereby devaluing everybody's wealth.
Yeah.
So your chancellor, he does quantitative easing. Sounds really complicated. What they're doing is they're printing more money, so that the money that you, the £100 that you have, is now worth £90 or £80. Well, of course, you're going to have a cost of living crisis. So at one point, I get really angry, and I think we need to, let's just say, address this issue of these people doing daylight robbery. And at the other time, I'm telling people, look, don't jump the gun in terms of seeking out, trying to carve out a living which is going to be displeasing to God because it affects society in a detrimental way. Because that's the thing that we have to think about. If something is haram, there's a reason for it, which is not to do with the fact that God doesn't like you doing it, which is how we think. Oh, it's haram because God gets angry. Well, why does he get angry? Because if you steal, defraud, you do, you sell narcotics, or you kind of undercut people in their business, and so on and so forth. All these affect human beings who God has taken an oath to help and to defend on the day of judgment. That's why, and that's pretty, it's pretty clear.
Yeah. Sheikh, one of the things I once heard, and I was wondering if you were able to confirm whether this was a position or not, was around spending time or staying within company at your own level in terms of particularly wealth. So it was a particular lecture that I was listening to, and it was a scholar who'd mentioned that you should spend time and be in the company of those who are at a similar or lower level of wealth than you rather than those above you, because that can, pique that sort of dissatisfaction or kind of feeling as if you're
Okay,
worse off.
interesting.
So
That's an
what's
interesting
your
one.
kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's going to get me in trouble with the if the sheikh's one of somebody I respect. Look,
So do you know who I'm referring to? Is that why you're
no,
saying that?
no, I've no idea. I've no idea. No, the thing is, look, that is true, and I imagine the scholar would have said that if you feel that you want to jump the gun and do something that you shouldn't be doing, or if you are afflicted with an illness and you're just fed up and you're thinking, why is God afflicting me with this illness? Well, you need to look around. You need to go to abroad, go to look at countries, look at illnesses. Absolutely true. But there's also this aspect of, wealth is not evil. And this is the thing that I think we really need to think about: is wealth and being wealthy is not evil. You've got a longer, harder job of justifying it. But if you've been meticulous in seeking after it, and the effect of it is such that, I'm thinking, I went to Umrah with my mother with a group in 2019, went to Arafat, and as we were going past, she said, "Oh, look at that! That's the aqueduct that who was it? Zubaydah Hatun built during the time that Abbasids. She built an aqueduct taking water from the plains all the way into Mecca al Mukarramah for the Hujjaj, and she built it from her own wealth. And the engineers doing it, this is in the third Islamic century, they said to her, looks too expensive. It's going to cost you too much because we'll find other ways, get camels to bring the water. And she said, no, make an aqueduct, build it, even if each strike of the hammer costs a gold coin. Now, the people that benefited from that water, she's not. How do you think she's going to be judged on the day of judgment? She provided, and she's just like Sayyidina Uthman. He has now awqaf, endowments and charities that are in his name to this day that are still giving out charity in his name, even though he passed away 1400 years ago. And why do you think and that happened? Because he was an amazing businessman who invested, at the point of his death. And that's the thing. You should surround yourself with the type of people you want to become. Now, if you want to become rich and wealthy in a way that is ethical, surround yourself with people that are rich and wealthy and ethical. If you want to be rich and wealthy and filthy, filthy meaning filthy, not filthy rich, filthy in your ethics, do that and you'll make your money. Because there's studies on the fact that this is why people send a lot of people send their kids to private schools, because if they're surrounded by people with a specific mindset, it rubs off. And that's true. And it's the same thing with people who want, you probably watch all these podcasts with this, they say, oh, just by being in the company of people that are high achievers, you achieve much more. It's like 15% increase in your productivity, whether it's education, whether it's wealth or anything. So the thing you have, it comes back to this idea of, it's not about sitting in a hut, cross-legged, like a yogi. There's nothing like that in our religious tradition at all. It's a challenge. This is, the whole thing about life is, in fact, there's a fantastic story that'll explain this to you. One of my teachers told me a story of a great sheikh in Morocco who sent his student to another great sheikh in the in a city. So this sheikh was sitting in a desert. His student comes to him and says, well, you need to go for me to another sheikh who's in the city, give my salams to him and ask him to pray for me. He goes to this major city. He finds the place he lives, asks about him. He finds this massive house, goes in, and he's sitting in front of this apparently quote unquote sheikh, lovely clothes, amazing garden. And he's thinking, okay, I'll just do it. Assalamu alaikum from my teacher. And he says, wa alaikum salam, and this and that. And he's thinking, I've done it, but this doesn't feel right. He goes all the way back to his sheikh in a hut in the desert. And he says, I went there, I saw the person, that was his name, I gave salams, but I think we must have made a case of mistaken identity because he's not the person that is close to God. And his teacher said, well, if I had what he had, I would not be able to sustain my connection with God, whereas he has what he has, and he has a higher station with God. In other words, the wealth he had didn't affect him. Whether it was in his pocket, his hand, or whether he went and became a pauper and poor, it wouldn't make any difference. Whereas the scholar in the desert, he was there because he knew he couldn't deal, he couldn't hack, as we say, the wealth, because he would be corrupted. And so that's the thing. I mean, we have this conception of wealth where it's something that's filthy, and if he's rich, he must have done it or she must have done it in a way that's illicit or impermissible. No, it's possible to earn and to give and to be generous and charitable through the fact that you seek. That person must have waited to the right time to make the decision, which was a pure decision which is halal, and Allah blessed them in it. If you go around the Muslim world, you find that.
I think what I'm hearing then, Sheikh, is it's important that we come back just to our core faith and have trust that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has what's our best interests there. And in terms of looking at our wealth, if you're of somebody who is desiring more wealth and it's not coming to you, then, we have to look at it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is maybe protecting us for something that we don't know. And that actually, as you've just demonstrated or explained in that example there, that putting wealth in certain people's lives could, lead to things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and could risk their position in the afterlife, and vice versa if they, if somebody of wealth is switched with somebody who's not got wealth. So it's again coming back to that kind of core fundamental faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and him as being, as we say, the best of planners. There's a couple of questions there. So I think the one that's showing on the screen just now, you have kind of touched on this. So the given that our risk is written and pre-described, how do you reconcile with people that say, then what's the point in working hard for risk? So we kind of talked about that.
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that. Yeah.
There's another question which is on our Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come back to this one that's just come on the screen now, but the one on the Instagram is, what is the position on doing dua for risk?
What's the position on doing dua? It's like, it's pretty clear that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you rizqun wasi'a. It's like, it's one of the ways of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam to ask for rizq and ask for, this is the amazing thing. Wasi'a means, it's like one of the names of Allah subhanahu is wasi'a, the one that is vast. And you're asking for rizq which is vast. It's like an ocean. You're like, okay, why would it be haram to be wealthy if you're asking Allah subhanahu to give you rizq which is wasi'? Wasi' is like expansive, unending. In other words, what it does is it facilitates the heart to focus on the worship of God, because regardless of how pious you are, regardless of how your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, there is an agitation that comes with losing rizq or having less rizq or fearing for your, the amount of wealth that you'll have for your children, or the fact that they have a hard life. This is normal human beings. And the Prophet ﷺ used to, seek, protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from debt. أعوذ بك من الدين. Why do you seek refuge from debt? Is because when a person is in a state of debt, they become agitated in their relationship to God, and they might even strive to do something impermissible in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So making dua is like, there's a whole area which is a fascinating area of how you can unlock your rizq, one of which is to do dua, and one of which is to do istighfar, one of them which is to have taqwa. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Allah says, whoever has a fearful awareness of God, Allah will provide them from where they never thought. Well, that's just having fearful awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're provided from where they never thought. That means it comes because of the fact that you've done something which then requires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His beneficence and majesty, to envelop you in His amazing outpouring of His generosity. So dua is essentially to ask for tawfiq, is to ask for your action to be in sync with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. And that is, that's a high station, because you kind of, leaving aside your ability and your striving and seeking it directly from the one that gives. But once you've admitted it's only Allah that gives, then obviously you're going to strive for it in the best way.
Yeah. So, Sheikh, as we come towards the end of this session, be interesting to know if you had any. In fact, we've got one here. Crypto M has asked, historical question: how did wealthy Sahaba like Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf store their coins, given there were no banks, vaults, and they were always traveling? So no mattresses to hide them under. Then
no, it's an interesting one, because Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf, when he arrived in the city of Madinah al-Nawwara, he'd lost a lot of his ability to earn when he left, because he's one of the muhajir, one of the people that came from Mecca. But he had this entrepreneurial spirit, and when he came, the Prophet prayed for him and gave him indications of how to earn a living. And by the time that he got into full motion in earning, he owned whole caravans that came into the city of the Prophet ﷺ. He bankrolled almost, some narrations say, half of the muhajirun, like half of the people that emigrated with the Prophet ﷺ to Madinah al-Nawwara, who were poor. You think of all the people that had been freed from slavery. He bankrolled their existence, and it was in and out. It was like, it's into the hand and out, not in the heart, because once it's attached to the heart, you need a place to store it. So Abd al-Rahman bin Auf, and it's the same with Zayn al-Abidin, the great grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. When he died, people realized, and this is a fascinating thing, his family accused of him of being miserly, tight-fisted. His family, no, this is not like his enemies. We're talking about his family used to have this thing that he's not spending on, he's not giving. And until he passed away, over 100 families started frequenting the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. And they realized that he used to pay for their upkeep. So when he was alive, he did it and didn't tell anybody. People thought he was a miser. And so one of the things that's amazing is that this idea of it's in the hand and it goes out the hand. And it's because, these great people, they understood that, إن الصدقة تقع في كف الرحمن قبل أن تقع في كف الفقراء. That charity falls into the hands of God before it falls into the hand of the poor person. So it's like, there's an idea where to store it, but the reality is, in Islamic history, if you go to the Umayyad Mosque, in the courtyard of the Umayyad Mosque, if you look at pictures, Google it, in the courtyard, you find this amazing structure on, I think, 8 pillars, and there's a building on top of it, a small kind of room. That was a treasury where they kept all the money, and the money was kept, and there was guards that guarded it, but it's in the central masjid. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was the same thing. In the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to keep store of the wealth that used to come in, and it used to be given out very, very quickly. And so one of the things in the Quran, which I'll talk about in the course, is that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want the wealth to accumulate in the hands of a few. دولة بين الأغنياء منكم. It doesn't want it to be something that just goes in the hands of rich people and comes back into the hands of rich people. Goes round like a roundabout where the poor people don't get any access to it. So these companions, Allah granted them amazing rizq and an amazing appreciation of what rizq is. So it's like this
Mm.
process of giving, taking and giving. It's an amazing, it's an amazing process.
Thank you, Sheikh. And before we wrap up, we've reached the hour mark now. Just wanted to ask if you had any final kind of practical tips for people to let go of financial worries. You'd mentioned there that dua and tawbah were very important in that. I don't know
Mm.
if you've ever heard of gratitude journaling or whether that's a new concept that you've heard of,
Tell me
where
about
you
it. It's fascinating.
well, it's almost like a diary where you keep a note of everything that you feel thankful for. You're kind of journaling what's happened in that day that you're thankful for to kind of remind yourself of just how fortunate you are. So I saw that and I thought I'll mention that to you. But is there anything that you can offer in terms of practical tips for people who are struggling financially, who may have
Mm.
financial means but are struggling in other ways of risk?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand it and understand that what Allah has written for you will never miss you, and what's missed you will never have come to you. So this sense of regret and remorse is not something that's part of a believer, and the only way you can understand that is to really strengthen your connection with God, and absolve yourself of ghafla, of heedlessness of what God has given you. And journaling is an amazing way because it reminds you of what you have rather than what you don't have. But in terms of the practical, there's du'as of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a fascinating dua of Abu Umama, who's very famous, very poor companion, used to get into debt all the time. And once he was in debt and he was in the mosque, he was just worrying about how to pay it. Like he's sitting and he's just nowhere to go. And in fact, probably he wanted the Prophet to see him. If you can imagine, the Prophet's house is right, the door is into the mosque. So if you see the Prophet coming into the mosque, you'll see him and he'll say, "Well, what's up with you? You look really dejected and stressed out." And he did. He said, "Duyun ghalabatni." It's the fact that debts have overpowered me. And the Prophet taught him a dua. A dua is very, very simple. Allah, I seek refuge in you from worries and depression. I seek refuge in you from incapacity and laziness. I seek refuge in you from غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال, and from the overpowering weight. Think of it, your shoulder, overpowering weight of debt and the oppression of humans. Because the person you're in debt to will come and they'll chase you, and the bank will send the letters. And if you've taken it from a loan shark, they will come after you and your family. I mean, you can, in the past, think of it. In the past, if you were in debt, they would take your family. So it's not like today where you'll go bankrupt in a year, you'll clear it out, and it's not a big problem. Think about the past, you would go into slavery. So when we think about it now, that journaling thing is such an interesting thing because we have it really good. We live now like kings lived 100 years ago. You had a shower this morning, a king couldn't have that 100 years ago. You choose the fact that you've even eaten one or two things. Like the worst case scenario is what you've had is what? Two things? Like whatever it is, kings didn't live like that. And so we have perceptions of reality which are so distorted that we just need to be slapped out of it. Because Allah has given us so much as human beings, so much potential, and we just are ungrateful. And that's what the Quran says. It says it, and unfortunately, it says it in a way that we find it uncomfortable. But indeed, human beings are created in a state of ingratitude. Yeah, and that's just, come on, we need to wake up. You cannot be ungrateful for the amazing blessings you have. And if you think they're not blessings, look at other people, because it's definitely blessings. And to lift your eyes up and just to take stock of the fact that you have what you have is really, really something that gives you so much power, liberation, and tawfiq and tawakkul ala Allah. That's it. Just have this intense you know kind of fearfulness of God, awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other thing is know what you're supposed to do and know what's halal, what's haram, and just once you know it, then stick to it. Your rizq, your consumption of food and drink, your employment, your clothing, everything, you should seek it, because the hadith of the Prophet is very interesting. You know, people make dua, and I've just given you a dua from the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet said a person came disheveled and dusty, and he says, Ya Rab, O Allah, O Allah. وَمَطْعَمُهُ haram, his food is haram. وَمَشْرَبُهُ haram, his drink is haram. وَمَلْبَسُهُ haram, and his clothing is haram. فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. How is he going to be responded to by God? Okay, he's wanting things, but look at how he earns his living. Look at how he drinks. Look at how he clothes himself. And today, how he transports himself, how he does X, Y, and Z. How will he be responded to by God? And so, if as a Muslim, alhamdulillah, we're Muslims and we have this thing that Allah is the most important relationship we have, then in our conversation with God, if the things we're consuming and earning are a blockage between ourselves and the thing that we want to have a relationship with, you know, what's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of you prostrating in prayer if you know that there's no connection? Like the phone line is cut. Do you understand? Like you're calling and it's cut. Why is it cut? Because you've pulled out the plug from the socket. And putting the socket back in requires you to reconnect. Very simple.
Yeah. Thank you, Shaykh. It's been a very meaningful conversation, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all the ability to overcome our own trials and tribulations in a way that is pleasing to Him and not a way that we feel is best for us. Shaykh, it's been a pleasure to have joined you on this live again. And just to remind everybody who is watching, you can see from the banner at the bottom there that there is still spaces available on the deep fiqh and deep aqidah courses. So please do visit the www.isyllabus.org website for that information, and also to encourage everybody to attend the 15th of September full day course, the Fiqh of Life, where we will be having similar discussions on a various number of topics, and you'll have an opportunity, inshallah, to pick up on some of the questions that we ask ourselves, as in, you know, what's halal and haram in our daily lives. Shaykh, Jazakallah khair, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to everyone who has tuned in and listened, and inshallah we'll see you all very soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.